On this part of the tutorials on JavaScript, we are going to talk about for loops. So let's create a new file for loop and call it forloop.js, and also an HTML file for it. Copy and paste and for.html. For loop.js, save the code, and here we go. So general form of a for loop in JavaScript is like this. We have three statements inside of the parentheses. The first one is the variable itself. So before we start writing the for loop, we can define a variable like I. Let I be equal to, for example, 0, and then we can start from I equals to 0, and then up to a level. So for example, we want it to go from I equals to 0 up to 10. So I smaller equal and smaller. And then we want to increment I. We can also decrement I, and we will talk about that later, but for now we want to increment I. And now we can write console.log I, or you can console.log I or I multiplied by 3. So let's save the code and let us open the HTML file related to the for loop. So let's find it out. There we go. So instead of the inspect elements console, so we seem to have a problem here. Okay, it's not about the commas, and also there should be something as a syntax error. The problem here is that instead of comma we should use semicolon. And also for here, let's save the code and see if there's any other syntax error. There we go, no problem. And as you can see, the numbers from 0 to 10 has been multiplied by 3 and printed out on the console. So this is done by using console.log inside of the for loop and looping through, looping by incrementing I and multiplying by 3. We can do a lot more stuff here. So for example, we can write, we can console.log a string or other things, or we can do different operations on the variable. Notice that if you're working with an array or a list or whatever there is, or an object, then you can loop through that. We're going to talk about those as well. There are so many different ways to loop through something or use loops in JavaScript. We have for each, as you can see here. We also have for, but by using, for example, x in array, and then we say, and we also need to define it inside of the for loop. So for example, we have an array, and then we have let x in array. Also, I need to define a variable x in array, and then also we need to have an array before that, an array, and make it equal to, so for example, also don't forget about const array. Car, so for example, we want to name the assets of a person. Car, house, crypto, and so on. So here we can console.log x, console.log x, save the code, and let's see what's the result inside of the console. So here there seems to be a problem for x in array. So here it has just looped through the array, but it has printed out the indices of the elements inside of the array. So this way it will only print out the indices, but if you want to print out the elements themselves, let us try of instead of in. So in JavaScript we also have of, and let us see how this one results. So as you can see, instead of the indices we have the elements themselves. So using in, we will only, so if I use in and use let, define a variable called x by let, we will see the indices of these elements. But if I use of here instead of in, then we will have the elements themselves printed out. So also let me do this for the indices. For let x in array, and then console.log x, and it's more beautiful to write index because it is actually an index, not the element. Save. Also here, instead of x, I can write element to make it more clear what we want to print out inside of this for loop. Element. For element of array, console.log element. For index in array, console.log index. So let's save the code and see that what happens. Here, as you can see, the elements and their indices have been printed out. There's also another way to loop through an array. This is the third way. And for that, we can use this method right here. And here I can write, and for the first attribute, I can write nothing and use semicolon, meaning that it starts from 0. And then I can say I, which is smaller than the length of, or the array dot length, and then I can say I++. Also I can write I equals to 0. And then we have the block inside of the for loop, console.log. And here we have I as the index. So we can console.log the array and then the element of the array, so which is I. So it will loop through the array and print out every element of the array. So because it starts from 0 to up to the length of the array, and you should also put -1 because it starts from 0 and the length of the array is 3, so it starts from 0 to 2, which is 3 minus 1. So let's save the code and see if there is any syntax error. There seems to be one, and let's check out what that is. So here, let us see what it says here. Oh, there is a comma instead of semicolon. So let's fix this. And save the code, retry, and so we don't have any problem. As you can see here, only car and house has been printed out, and we don't have crypto. So let's also console.log I, save the code, and let us see why crypto hasn't been printed out. So as you can see, we have 0 and 1, we don't have 2. So let's see why that happens. The length of the array is 3, and probably it shows 2 because it starts from 0 up to 2. So let's save the code and retry. Okay, the reason is that it's smaller than, not smaller equal than. So if it's smaller equal than array.length and it's -1, there won't be any problem. Or you can say that smaller than array.length and it will just work in the same way. So let's save the code and refresh the page, and you can see that also crypto has been printed out. You can also say I, comma, and array I, so that you can see the index of each element next to it. Save the code and refresh the page. As you can see, 0 car, 1 house, 2 crypto. Just the way you want it to be. So you also have another way, and that is using for each, and that needs a kind of function to loop through the array itself. But these three are the fastest ways to loop through the array. But if you want to use for each method, that one will also work for you. So you can say array dot for each, and then inside of the parentheses you can define a function. For example, my function, my underlying function, and you can console.log this one, console.log, and then inside of a function, so function, my function, and then we have no attributes for this function. We have a code block, and it should return the value for the array elements. So return So it should return the elements of the array. So here we should write something that shows the element of the function of the array. So in order to show the elements of the array, we actually need to have different attributes. So the three famous attributes: the value, the index, and the array. Necessarily have to be array. It could be something else, for example, assets. And then here we should write array no matter what the name of the array is. So don't get it wrong. It doesn't really have to do with the name of the array. You should anyway write array. Here we want to return the value, and let us see what happens when we do that. So let's refresh the page, and it's somehow undefined, and let's see why that happens. Probably the reason is we shouldn't use console.log here, and instead we can just say that const a variable, for example const a equals to array for each, my function, and then here you can say console.log value, console.log value, so save and Refresh. As you can see, car, house, and crypto are printed out. So instead of writing console log here, we should write it inside of the function so that we can loop through each one of the array's elements. So that's nearly it for different kinds of for loops. Notice that we also have while loop that we're going to cover in a separate tutorial. But up to now, we've learned about different forms of for loop and how to loop through through an array. Also notice that here, instead of I++, we can write nothing and it will work just the same way. So let's save the code and refresh the page and see what happens here. Oh, it's entering an infinite loop, so we'd better stop this for now. So let's write I++, save the code and refresh the page. So as you can see, it's been crashed and it's continuing to print over and over again the first item of the loop. So you cannot close, you should just close it forcibly. So let me do this very quick and reopen our for loop document. There it is. And so inspect elements, console, and as you can see, car and house and crypto are printed out. So don't ever try this in this kind of circumstance, because when you don't write it, it will keep printing and printing the very first one and it won't ever stop. So there needs to be a plus so that we go forward and the number increments, and then we can get outside of the loop, because otherwise the computer keeps computing and keeps printing, and all it does is just printing, and as a result the browser will be busy only and only printing out the first element of the array, and it won't ever stop. So let's see if we increment and we start from the array length up to the first. So array length -1, because we want to start from the last one, which is item number 2. Notice that it starts from 0, not 1. So if you want to start from the end, it starts from the ID number 2, which is crypto, and it should get to 0. So whenever it's greater equal to 0. And I guess that's it. So let's try this one and see if this method also works. If we want to reverse it, so as you can see, it's been reversed. 2, 1, and 0. So it starts from 2 crypto, 1 house, and 0 car. So you can also start from the end up to the beginning, and this format of writing helps you do that. And that is opposite to these methods that you're not able to do such kind of task. So here, let's do the opposite. Can increment instead of decrementing, and this one should be the length of the array without equal, and also it should change to smaller. So smaller than the array length, and this one should start from 0. Okay, that's it. Let's save this and refresh the page. As you can see, this one starts from 0. The other one starts from 2. Perfect. So we've learned different ways to loop through an array, different for loops, different methods. and you can preferably use each one of them at a time that is based on your need. So based on your, it is up to you to choose which way to go based on the circumstance that you're in, whether you want to decrement, start from the end, or start from the beginning, or you want it to be easier, and so on. So that's it for this tutorial for the for loop. And in the next ones, we're going to talk about other different kinds of the loops and also while loop.